joining us. You're watching this scene coming out of Lebanon, and when you see the people who have come all over the world to pay their homage to Said Hassan and also to Said Ashim Saifuddin, what comes to your mind when you're watching the scene out of Beirut?
Well, what we understand from the ceremony that is going on in Beirut for Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah and Sheikh Safiuddin, it shows that even though Israel bombarded and destroyed most of southern Lebanon for the past, how many months? 4 months, 6 months? The Islamic resistance is still there. So the dream of Netanyahu of finishing off Hamas and finishing off Hezbollah and securing the borders of Israel has not yet been realized. By seeing the scenes that are coming from Beirut, where you have many Lebanese and international guests, people who are not only Shia, but people who are Christians, like we see in this picture here, or Sunnis, or people who are maybe even atheists, but who have come from all the corners of the planet to say farewell to Hassan Nasrallah.
Yeah.
It shows that Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah has become a myth. He has become a legend who is inspiring the international community, the left, the anti-imperialists, the anti-Zionists across the planet. Even though Israel was armed to the teeth by the Judeo-American empire, and for the last 16 months, they carried genocide in Gaza, and they extended their genocide even in Lebanon, where thanks to their sophisticated surveillance equipments, they were able to pinpoint and assassinate most of the leaders of Hezbollah. What we are seeing today from Beirut, it shows that Hezbollah has not been destroyed. But Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, he has become a myth. He has become the Che Guevara of Islam, the person who is going to inspire millions and millions of humans in our planet to fight against the Israeli fascist regime. And what we saw and what we're seeing now, where the Israeli fascist minister of war, Israel Katz, he even sent Israeli jets over the stadium where the ceremony for the burial of Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah is taking place. It shows the amok, it shows the insecurity that goes on in Tel Aviv. The Zionists, even though they are probably the most well-armed regime in our planet, which is being paid and armed by Western governments, and in particular by the United States, has not been able to achieve a victory. For people who have been following Netanyahu in the past weeks, Netanyahu lives in delirium. He thinks that he is some kind of biblical leader of Israel who is defeating the Amalek. And we remember when the Israeli genocide started against Gaza, Netanyahu, he went to the media and he declared a war against Amalek. But if we will use biblical terminology, is that we have the kids of Baalbek, of the biblical Baalbek, with their leader Hassan Nasrallah, who are still fighting and resisting Judea. Yes, it is true that thanks to the treachery and to the corruption of the Zionist regime, they were able to assassinate like cowards in distance Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah. What they have done actually is that they have turned him into a hero. The Zionists did the same mistake that American imperialists were doing in 1950s and 60s when they were going after communist revolutionaries, people like Che Guevara and others. As a result of this, we had millions and millions of humans in our planet who will mobilize themselves and join the communist struggle against American imperialism. And we know the result. The Americans, they lost in Vietnam, they lost in Korea, they lost throughout the planet. And American imperialism had to retreat. And the same thing is going on today, even in Israel. The pictures coming from Beirut, where we see hundreds of thousands and probably millions of people descending from all corners of Lebanon to pay their farewell to Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, it shows that Hezbollah is massive. In the past weeks, the American Zionist government, in collaboration with Israel, they have been trying to divide the Lebanese. They've been trying to bribe certain Lebanese politicians with the hope that they are going to remove the influence of Hezbollah from the Lebanese state. But these hundreds of thousands of Lebanese who are shouting death to Israel and who are shouting, Labbaik ya Nasrallah, we respond to you, Nasrallah, this is the best answer that Sheikh Nasrallah, if he was to be alive, would have given to the Zionists and their quisling collaborators in the Arab world.
When you look at images coming out of Lebanon right now, and you mention it, that resistance for the people will always be there as long as there's oppression that is forcing them to resist. Why do you think this very simple concept is very difficult for colonizers, oppressors like Israel to conceptualize? Why is it so difficult for them to understand? Even if you're not Shia, you're not Muslim, you mentioned the communist resistance to oppression. We saw that in the, you know, the way Guevara has become a symbol of resistance for millions of people and crossing across border. So this is something that has happened repeatedly in history. Why, in your opinion, do you think it's so difficult for the oppressors to understand this very simple concept?
No, the Zionists, they do understand it, and they are very, very afraid of Hezbollah. Look, there were some probably miscalculations on the side of Hezbollah when the conflict started between Hamas and Israel, because the late Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, he had continuously declared that the next stage of the war between Hezbollah and Israel will be in Israeli territories. But because probably they didn't coordinate things with Hamas, Hezbollah didn't do what it was promising to do when Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was alive. Now, the Zionists, they do understand very well, and they are very worried. And for this reason, the American and the Zionist regimes, or the Judeo-American empire, have, since the fall of Soviet Union in 1991 to this day, have made continuous wars in the Arab world and in the Middle East against revolutionary Islam. First, the Zionists thought that their danger will come from Arab secular Baathist nationalism. For this reason, they went against Saddam Hussein, they destroyed him. They went against Gaddafi in Libya, they destroyed him. They went against Bashar al-Assad, and by using the Takfiris, they destroyed him. But what the Zionists could not destroy was the revolutionary Islam. During the era of George Bush Jr., he declared a global war on terrorism, which was a war against Islam. Mm-hmm. At first, the Americans, they went against Sunnis, they targeted the Muslim Brotherhood, but then what happened is that after the toppling of Saddam Hussein, from the year 2006 to this day, what happened is that we have a new wave of political Islam, which will take the leadership in the Muslim world. And this will be the revolutionary Islam, or the axis of resistance, headed by Sayyid Ali Khamenei and Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah. even though these two personalities in the history of political Islam, they were Shia, what the axis of resistance has shown to the Muslim world, I'm a Sunni, I'm talking from a Sunni Muslim country here, but what Iran and Hezbollah showed to the Muslim Ummah is that we should leave aside our differences. We have a common enemy, which is Zionist colonialism, and we have to unite and liberate Palestine. And this is the thing that worries the Zionists a lot. For people who follow Benjamin Netanyahu or who have read his books, he has a number of books and articles about fighting terrorism. With his books, he educated and he taught to American Zionists what to do. Netanyahu is really obsessed with political Islam. And when he sees these pictures coming now from Beirut, he is afraid like a hell. And not only him, but all the people around him. All the Zionist establishment of Israel is in panic. Yes, it is true, they have superior weapons. Yes, it is true, they committed genocide in Gaza, where they killed probably more than 100,000 people. Yes, it is true, they implemented the Dahia doctrine for the second time in Lebanon by flattening cities, by mass killing civilians in order to pressure Hezbollah to make a ceasefire. But still, when we see these people there protesting, these millions of people, every person that we see in this picture is a soldier of Hassan Nasrallah. And what is the slogan that these people are chanting now in Beirut is Lebeik ya Nasrallah. We respond to you, Nasrallah. Nasrallah is dead, but his message lives in time and in space. His message has shown the path to the humanity, and not only to Muslims, by the way, because the Zionist crimes have been and are condemned by the whole of humanity. We are seeing what is happening nowadays throughout the West, from Germany to Canada. You cannot condemn the Zionists. You cannot tell to people what they are doing, because you'll be immediately arrested, blackmailed, removed from your job, persecuted, and whatever. So the Zionists, they understand very well what's going on. But the problem is that they do not know what to do. What will they do? A few days ago, the infamous Zionist spy Jonathan Pollard, he had a podcast in one YouTube channel, and he was predicting that the next step that Israel must do is to use the neutron bomb against Egypt. I mean, the Zionists, they hate all the Arabs and Muslims who are around them. But since the Camp David Accords, when they made peace with Egypt in 1978-79, and then with the peace treaty with Jordan, and now in December 2024, when they toppled the last standing Arab government which was not signing peace with Israel, which was Syria, they thought that by toppling these secular Arab leaders, by destroying the Arab nation states, we will win over the Muslims. But what has happened is that when Egypt solved the Palestinian issue in 1978 and 79 with Sadat, a miracle happened in Tehran. Imam Khomeini came, and we had the political Islam coming back. And what we see today in Beirut is a blowback of what Khomeini did in 1979 when he toppled the Shah. The year 1979, while it can be seen as the year of defeat of the secular Arab nationalism, this Arab nationalism that we see today from Cairo to Riyadh to Amman, they kiss and they lick the feet of the Zionist gangsters. And these regimes have discredited themselves. But what has happened is that since 1979, we have a new ideology in the world, which has inspired this urban guerrilla movements, from Hezbollah in Beirut to Houthis in Yemen to Hamas in Palestine and what have you. So those
Yeah.
Zionists, they know
Okay,
it
stay
and they're
with me,
very
Mr. Olsey. Stay with me. I'm sorry to cut you off. Stay with me because you are mentioning some very important points, and we are going to build upon that as we continue this discussion. But I want to bring in our colleague who is still with us in the studio, Nahid. You heard some of the statement that Mr. Olsey made about the differences between an Arab nationalistic-led resistance that the Israelis now feel as though they have toppled against an Islamic-based resistance ideology that is now against the Israeli occupation and also standing against the Israeli and American hegemonic plan. Can you please expatiate on that, the differences between these two concepts, the nationalistic Arab resistance that was led, and we can mention Egypt before it signed the accord that he was mentioning there, compared to the resistance that we now have that is an Islamic-based resistance against the Israeli occupation?
Sure. We have to bring into our discussion the concept of ummah. And I think that can explain and that can answer this very important question. I have to say, Zainab, this is so vital, that how nationalism and the concept of ummah and the resistance, which includes different forces and different countries and governments, are different. On one hand, we have nationalism, which is also important because we are talking about resisting against a foreign power. We are talking about different countries trying to maintain the power of indigenous people of their land and their soil. It's so important. But at some extent, we have to see what are the limitations of this perspective, of this worldview. When we are talking about ummah, we are talking about solidarity and unification of different ethnicities, different people all around the world. We're not going to say it's only about Shia. We have Solidarity Week. In Farsi, we say Wahdat. And what it means for us as the leader of the axis of resistance is that let's come together. Let's unify against the big, great Satan, the imperialism of the United States and the Zionism of Israel. That's the red line for us. Let's be unified behind this. And of course, there are some issues, there are some differences, but what we are seeing here right now in this very important moment is that a Shia leader has been martyred, and that's the burial ceremony for him. For people in Palestine and the liberation movement, who we know they are not as Shia in like Lebanon, like Iran, like Iraq. But the unification is the important point here, that as this is the hegemonic propaganda against us, they're trying to use this rhetoric, they're trying to feed the global audience that there are issues between them and they never ever can unify. But this is their dream. This is the objective that they are looking for. The reality is this very moment that we are seeing, a Shia leader is being buried, and at the same time we have Sunni people going there, putting their lives in threat, because we know the enemy doesn't fear anything from like principles and values. They do whatever they think they have to do to maintain themselves, but they're still going there. And as you said, it's not about even Muslim. It's not an Islamic cause anymore. Axis of resistance and at the core, Hezbollah, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah for 37 years, what they did, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah is not just a leader of organization, is the school of thoughts. It's the way he wants his people to understand the real cause and how to fight against it and how to commit to your values. It's the institution that is teaching people how to resist. So of course, when we are coming to this topic, we are not going to accept those claims that, oh, this is about nationalism, or it's not about nationalism, it's not about Lebanon. It is about Lebanon. This is the beauty of Hezbollah. It's not just about Ummah cause, even though I have to say there is no contradiction between these two. Because first of all, you have to defend your soil, your land, your country, and then you have to bring into your policies and your approach towards the world the most important cause, which is the liberation of Palestine. They are all together. I think Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, I believe Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah sacrificed his life, and all the soldiers of Hezbollah sacrificed their lives because of the Palestinian cause, but also because they want to protect their land. They're not going to accept, they haven't accepted any sort of colonial approach to their land. It's a respected soil. Lebanon, especially South Lebanon, only 2 days ago, the Zionists, the IOF soldiers, they were actually leaving the land because they understood. They came to this very basic reality that these people are not going to leave.
Yes.
They are here to stay.
Yes.
They are so committed, and they have a leader to follow, even though physically he's not around us. Even though physically we are seeing the very sad moment right now that we are going to say goodbye.
Yes.
But that's a goodbye for now.
Yes.
It's the start of a new era for us.
Exactly. Stay with me, Naid. I'm going to cross over back to Kuala Lumpur, where our guest is still with us, I hope. When we were talking and you were explaining the strength of the resistance, my question is, even with the destabilization campaign that Israel has meted out against some of this Arab nationalistic movement that you've mentioned across the Arab world, why does Israel still feel this sense of insecurity? Because if you look at it materialistically, Israel seems to have won, right? They've martyred Hassan Nasrallah, they've martyred Aniyeh, they've martyred Yahya Sinwar, they've turned Gaza into a rubble, they've destroyed a lot of buildings in southern Lebanon across the border. They did a lot of terror attack and injured thousands of people in Lebanon in just a few seconds. Why does the regime still feel as though it is not safe after these so many so-called victories that they've had over the resistance?
The answer is simple. The Israeli regime fears the ideology of revolutionary Islam. So yes, the Zionists, they can. Can you lower the voice the studio, because I hear myself back. So yes, the Zionist regime, they have been very successful on killing the leaders of the resistance, but their problem is that they cannot kill 1 billion Muslims. And this is what I was mentioning before about the podcast of Jonathan Pollard a few days ago, where he was foreseeing that Israel, in its war against its Arab Muslim neighbors, is planning to use the neutron bomb. Because look, Israel has military superiority. Israel is paid and armed to the teeth by the Americans, but the problem is that they live and they're surrounded by an Islamic ocean. There are more than probably 2 billion Muslims today in the world. And these Muslims, they all hate what the Zionists do. And on the other hand, the Zionist ideology, it doesn't accept coexistence. They do not want to make peace with the Lebanese. They do not want to make peace with the Iranians. They do not want to make peace with the Arabs. And they say it very openly because their ideology is like the Nazi ideology. They want to dominate, they want to rule, they don't want to exist. I mean, if we come to the very heart of the conflict that we have nowadays in Israel and Palestine, what is the problem? The problem is democracy, because Israel does not want to treat its Palestinians, the Palestinians of Gaza and West Bank, as its citizens. It doesn't want to give them rights. It treats them, it has built an apartheid system and treats them like being subhumans. Yes, Israel has the military superiority. Yes, Israel must kill its Muslim neighbors. But the problem is that the victories of Israel are are Pyrrhic victories, which means that yes, Israel kills, but Israel wins only small battles in the bigger war, which is the war of Zionism against Islam. And what we are seeing today in Beirut, after months and weeks of bombing and decimating southern Lebanon, where we see hundreds of thousands of Lebanese and probably millions of people marching in the streets of Beirut with the slogans of Hezbollah, with the flags of Hezbollah, to celebrate Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah. It shows to Netanyahu that yes, you have killed Nasrallah, but you have millions of Nasrallahs living in Lebanon. And the message of Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, as it was mentioned by the previous speaker, is a Ummatic message. I mean, why was Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah killed? What did he do that he was killed? He was killed because he joined the war in Gaza. His army, Hezbollah, attacked Israel and went to war with Israel on a simple condition. What was the demand of Hezbollah was Hezbollah asked Israel to stop its genocide in Gaza, and in that moment, Hezbollah will stop its attacks. And Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, he was not killed for himself. He was not killed for his group. He was killed for Palestine. He is a martyr of the Sunni Muslims of Palestine and Masjid al-Aqsa. And this is the importance of the message of Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah. And that's why the pictures that we see now from Lebanon are very worrying for the Zionist regime, because the billions of dollars that the Americans and the Zionists have spent in the past, how many decades? 5 decades, to destabilize Iran, to put Lebanon in civil war, to install dictators in the Sunni Arab world in order to crush revolutionary Islam, to incite hatred against Shias through Takfiri Wahhabism. All this money and investment has been finished. Why? Because today the Sunni Muslims from Jakarta to Sarajevo, they know very well why Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah was killed. He was killed because he was defending the Sunni Muslims of Palestine. And this is a nightmare for Israel, because, I mean, the project of Zionism has always been to divide and rule over the Arabs. This was what Israel and the British did since World War I, when they divided the Arabs from the Turks. And this is what they have done since the Islamic Revolution, of inciting.
Okay, stay with me.
All right.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. Stay with me, but I want to build upon the statement you just made about the division tactics that has been deployed or employed, whether it's by the British or the Israelis or the Americans, for decades. And I want to bring in our guest in the studio to just expand on that for us. When it comes to division, one of the go-to cards that we've seen over the couple of years that the Israelis and the Americans have consistently used is the sectarian divide among Sunnis and Shias. And Nahid, when you look at especially when we're looking at what has happened in Syria, and we see how effectively and how fast and quick the division came into play after months of people uniting and discrediting, sectarian belief and seeing the resistance as united, how quickly the division came in when sectarian was used, and Syria, well, we can say in some aspect has been lost, because Syria now is occupied by Israel. So just expand for us, why is it that till now the people of this region and some people in the world still have not understood how dangerous sectarian divide is?
For sure, such a very vital question to ask. Well, I have to say, we have to go back to 1948, the history of the Zionist entity, when we are right after World War II, and Europeans just decide to occupy an Arab land. And the framing that they have been working so hard on is that that's a religious war. That's about Jewish and Muslims. That's about fundamentalists and extremists, you call it, names and names for us, for the indigenous people of West Asia, trying to defend their soil, trying to say, who are you, basically? And this is the framing that they are getting used to. So first, it's about Jewish and Muslim war. Then it's about Sunni and Shia. Then and then and then. They are trying to divide us. They are trying to tell us and to highlight the differences, even though there are some parts that they didn't even exist before. They are injected by imperialist forces. They are injected, they are fabricated. And our power and our strength is rooted in knowing just the reality, in knowing the history of this precious area, that everyone wants to, everyone from the Western orbit, not everyone. We have the majority of the globe that actually wants the peace and development and everything for West Asia. We have a strong enemy that doesn't want. And you know what? This is the lesson that people of West Asia has to learn. If they haven't learned it until today, I think there is a significant opportunity for them to realize the very basic reality. The sectarianism does not going to address your issues, is not going to fix your problems. The problem is the Great Satan. The problem is US imperialism. The problem is Zionism entity. The entity that they literally bring into the region, a very Arab region, and try to occupy other soils, right, from this river to that river. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But they know well that if you are not educated, if you don't know the history of your country and your region, you are going to be deceived by the imperialist propaganda that, oh, this is Shia, this is Sunni, oh, I have to distance myself. No, you do not. What you should do is believe that unification and unity that Iran and Islamic Revolution of 1979 has been not only talking, but actually actively supporting and organizing. Let me bring the name of our commander, Haj Qasem Soleimani, that our leader described him as the organizer of the youth in the region. The youth was already there. The youth was already wanting to protect their land. What Iran did, what IRGC did, what Haj Qasem Soleimani did was organizing this youth and uniting against one enemy, that is Zionist entity.
Stay with me, Nayed. I want to go back to Kuala Lumpur and just ask Mr. Olsi, moving forward, in your opinion, what do you think is going to be the fate of the resistance if we have established that by the scenes that we are witnessing now from Lebanon, that the resistance is not finished. And if we're basing that also on the scenes that we've witnessed in Gaza repeatedly during the exchanges of prisoners for captives, that the resistance is not finished because resistance comes from the people. What is going to be the next step forward for the resistance then? Because we know perhaps this level of confrontation between the resistance and the Israeli regime has taken a pause, at least when it comes to direct confrontation. But we do know that the Israelis themselves have announced that there is going to be new levels of confrontation. In your opinion, how do you think the collective resistance will be able to respond to this, futuristic confrontation that is awaiting them?
Well, Israel and the Americans, they're trying their best to cut and to isolate the resistance. Can you
Mm.
please lower the voice of the speakers in Beirut
Yeah,
because
sure.
I cannot
Sure.
so in my opinion, Israel and Americans are trying to do their best to isolate the Islamic resistance. Number one, we know very well, and President Donald Trump has already said he's going to bring maximum pressure and sanctions against Iran. Because Iran is the heart of the resistance. If there is no Iran, then we know that Hezbollah and Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Houthis and the Hajj al-Shabi, they will not be what they are. So the heart of the resistance is Iran. Iran today for global Islamism is like Russia, Soviet Union, and Moscow during the time of the Soviet Union. So number one, Americans, they will try to isolate Iran, to destabilize Iran. And in the coming months, we might see new waves of protests, which will be waged by the Mujahideen al-Halq and other terrorist organizations. And you might have even terrorist attacks within Iran and what have you. Number two is Trump is trying to do what he tried to do during his first presidency, to create the so-called an Arab NATO. So Trump will try very hard to mobilize the quisling Arab regimes to mobilize them against Hamas, Hezbollah, and
Yeah.
Iran in particular.
Yeah. Please pardon me. I have to cut you off. My sincere apologies. Stay with me and all that thought. We're going to cross live to our correspondent, Mariam Saleh, who is going to be joining us from the scene. And I believe the procession is getting close to where she is, where the coffins of the marchers is passing across to go to where they will be finally laid to rest. Mariam, go ahead.
Hassan. Hassan. Sorry. Zainab, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Mariam. Go ahead, please.
All right, well, we just are in a very high emotional state here. And of course, it's very difficult to describe the emotions. People are lost for words. We are lost for words. We were just, of course, witnessing the movement of the coffins of both Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and
Um, it seems as though we're having some connection issues with our correspondent, but she was just trying to tell us that the scenes are very emotional. Obviously, we have been speaking to many Lebanese, and not just Lebanese, many people across the world who are watching these scenes coming live out of Beirut, and the only words they can use is emotional and overwhelmed because of the spiritual and physical and emotional connection that they feel towards these two personalities who they are now having to bid farewell to. I don't know if our correspondent is back with us. If she isn't, we will continue with our guest. Are you there, Mariam? Can you hear me? Okay, we will be continuing with our guest in Kuala Lumpur. Mr. Olsi, if you're still there, you can hear me. Kindly continue with the statement you were making.
Yeah, so can you please lower the voice in the studio? So as I was telling before is that the Americans and the Zionists, they will try in maximum to isolate Iran. They have already succeeded on isolating Lebanon from Iran by forcing the Quisling government of Beirut to stop Mahan Air and Iranian Airlines from flying to Beirut. So they will do everything in their power to cut the Lebanese from the Iranians. On the other hand, we know what is the plan of the Zionists in Gaza. Number one, Netanyahu regime, he wants to finish Hamas, but he has understood that he cannot finish Hamas for as long as there are Palestinians. So the project or the idea of Trump was to ethnically cleanse Gaza from the Palestinians and to throw the Palestinians out of Gaza. But this thing is not possible because if Trump and Netanyahu is going to expel the Palestinians towards Egypt and Jordan, this will be a big nightmare for Egyptians and Jordanians. The Jordanian monarchy might collapse because we know very well what happened to Jordan during the war of 1967 when Israel expelled 350,000 Palestinians,
Yeah.
most of them from the West Bank, and we almost had the collapse of the Jordanian monarchy. And
Yeah,
for
but I want
people
to
to
build on that, Mr. OC,
no, no,
because
hold on. Let me finish. And
okay, go ahead.
we saw already how King Abdullah of Jordan, when he met Donald Trump a few days ago in
Mhm.
Washington, he had brought his son with him, and he was literally crying in front
Mhm.
of Trump. And I mean, what the Zionists and Americans will try to do is that they'll try to isolate Hamas, they'll try to isolate Lebanon and Hezbollah, they'll try to isolate Iran, and their final objective will be regime change in Iran, which for them is not possible. Because what Iran has shown during the last war against Israel, the axis of resistance carried, and which is the longest war in the history of Israel, Iran showed the military abilities to hit the Zionist regime very hard. And the Zionists and the Americans, they know that they do not have a military option for Iran. So they will try to isolate Iran in order to make the people to protest against the government. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. But what I wanted to, highlight while you were speaking was that you mentioned that the Arabs are being forced to take in the Palestinian, as Trump has mentioned, that they will empty out Gaza. But you also pointed to the fact that many of these Arab countries and many of these Arab regimes are subjected to American and Israeli dictate. So how will they stand against this plan? If the United States decide tomorrow to forcibly expel Palestinians, we obviously know that the Palestinians will resist this forcible migration. But we see that most of this Arab regime already have normalized ties with Israel, and those who have not openly normalized ties have, under the deal, under the table normalization. How would the Arabs stand against this plan?
Well, look, the Arab secular regimes, they will stand against this plan because this plan is life and death, and for them. And we have to understand that even Arab regimes, they have their own red lines. For example, let's take the example of Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein, he was a Zionist American agent. They brought him to power, they armed him, they used him against Iran during the Iran-Iraq war. But then when they sent Saddam Hussein to Kuwait, and then they launched the first Gulf War, and then the second Gulf War, Saddam Hussein suddenly became their enemy. And because even though these Arab leaders, they are puppets of the Zionist West, when their life is in danger, they become suicidal. So we will see the same thing. I mean, for example, for people who are following Israeli media in the last days, Israeli establishment is planning a war against Egypt. Why? Because Egyptian President Al-Sisi has threatened with war Israel in case that they will expel the Gazans in Sinai. And why will Sisi do this? He will not do it because he loves the Palestinians, but if you have 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, they can march in Cairo and they can topple Sisi. And this will lead to regime change in Egypt. So the Egyptian military dictatorship, they know very well that there is a kind of red line that they will never, even though they are puppets of the West and they are puppets of the Americans, there is a red line. I mean, we have seen even in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, one of the most loyal puppets of the Zionist empire, who, when Netanyahu said that let's create a Palestine in Saudi Arabia became very hostile towards Israel because these people, these dictators, these people who rule by terror over the Arab nations, because I mean, in Egypt and in Saudi Arabia, you don't have the democracy that you have in Iran, where in Iran we have protests every day and for everything. These dictators, they cannot tolerate destabilization of their regimes. And that is why these people, they have their own red line. And if Palestinians will be mass expelled from Gaza, they will react. Now,
Yeah.
someone might make another question. Why are the Arab regimes against Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah? The answer is simple. Arab dictators, they want to live in peace. They see Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah as troublemakers. They say these people want to fight against Israel. We don't want to fight against Israel. We don't care that there is apartheid in Palestine. We don't care that Israel will take one day probably Masjid al-Aqsa and turn it into the Temple of Solomon. The dictators, they want to live in peace. And when they see the revolutionary Iran and revolutionary Islam in Beirut and in Gaza and in the West Bank, they are worried because they say these people who want democracy in Israel, they will demand democracy one day in Saudi Arabia as well. And that's why we have this alliance between Arab secular dictatorships with the Zionist regime.
Yeah. Okay. Stay with me. I want to cross over now to our colleague here in the studio. Nahid, our guest was talking about the resistance of the Arabs, of many of these Arab countries. And when we do say Arab, we're not talking about the average citizens in many of these Arab countries who are actively against the Israeli occupation and actively against the occupation of Palestine and completely for the Palestinian people. We're talking about some of the government who have normalized ties with the Israeli regime. He's talking about the fact that many of these Arab countries also have their red line. And I want to just get your opinion on that. That do you agree that there is a red line for the Arabs, for the Arab regime? Because when we go back to the history of this conflict, whether it is starting from the first occupation of Palestine, the expulsion of the Palestinian, the wars against Lebanon and Syria, and the betrayal of the Egyptians. And it's just been downhill from there. The resistance that the Arab coalition had and the support that they used to have for Palestine and Gaza has now dwindled to simple statement. So when we see that the Americans and the Israelis are pushing ahead with their plans, how resisting or what kind of resistance do you think these Arab countries can put against this plan? And do they really have a red line?
Well, there are a couple of points that I have to make here. I remember the Islamic conference that we had last year when our martyred president, Raisi, attended. And in that conference, in that very important conference, our president had a very basic proposal for the Islamic countries, for Arab countries, that, okay, if we are going to stop the genocide, that's the way we have to go through. We need to make sure, first of all, to stop fueling the fire, to stop giving the resources that the Zionist entity needs to kill children in Gaza. That's very, very simple. That if you agree that the genocide is happening and you want to stop it from continuing, let's unite again. Let's unite together. Let's make sure at least the bare minimum is that they don't have the resources. And I'm talking about oil and gas. what they need to bomb children in Gaza. That didn't happen, right? So that's the very first thing that it came to my mind when you asked this question. We also have to remember again the history. History is so helpful. We just need to learn from it and apply it to our very present. Said Hassan Nasrallah, I read a book a couple of weeks ago, Zubur Muqawamat. It is about Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. And in that, it's actually, I really agree with this statement that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was the first victorious Arab figure after 6 Days War. Until then, there was none. And there was no attempt to actually be victorious against the enemy, the Zionist enemy. That's very important because sometimes the strategy is different. Sometimes you actually go back and go forward. That's a different tactic, that's a different story. But there was no desire, no attempt to actually win the war against Zionism. Okay, we are back. And now there is no dignity, there is no Arab dignity. It was Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the one that we are, right now, we are seeing the very emotional scene of burial of him. That, no, victory is possible and it's going to happen. And I'm going to, and my soldiers are going to make it happen.
Yeah.
And as Sheikh Naim Qassem said in his very important speech today, they are the children of Haj Qassem as well.
Yeah.
So, was it about Arabs who are trying to support the cause of Palestine? Sure. Which Arabs? These Arabs, the
Yes.
ones in Yemen, the ones in Lebanon, South Lebanon, the ones in Iraq, the resistance that has been established very strongly by the support of 1979 Islamic Revolution.
Yes. Okay, stay with me. I'm
No
gonna
worries.
cross over to our guest in Kuala Lumpur, and I want to just thank him for taking his time to share some of his thoughts with us. And on a final note, I want to ask him, when we look at the fact that the Israeli regime globally, the reputation that they've been able to create through propaganda and through the the blatant lies that has been coming from mainstream media, this reputation has been shattered because of the 15-month genocide that was perpetrated against Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, and also the expansion of that war to Lebanon, especially during the pager terrorist attack that targeted thousands of people simultaneously. In your opinion, going forward, how will Israel or the Israeli regime and those who support them continue to exist in a world where majority of people are now completely against them?
Well, the Israeli regime now is surviving through force. And we see what even the administration of President Donald Trump is doing. Now, I mean, the American empire has come in a moment where the empire is globally hated. They are no longer loved. And what happens is that when empires come in a crisis of their existence, they use violence and terror. So what we are seeing happening nowadays is that the American Zionist empire is using terror because they believe that the only way how they can survive and still stay in power is by using mass violence and terrorism. But when empires become so violent and regimes become so violent, it is that they humiliate even their vassals, their clients. And we're seeing what is happening now to what is happening now to Israel. I mean, the puppet Arab regimes, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, these regimes who were normalizing their relations with Israel, who were telling to Israelis, let's join together and we go and fight Iran. All these regimes are suddenly understanding that Israel and America is dangerous even for their existence. So this war, we can say that, and we have to make this statement, is that even conventionally, Israel killed more Muslims, more Arabs than Israelis were killed.
Huh.
In a in a strategic perspective, Israel has lost this war. Why? Because
Hmm.
number one is that the international community,
Hmm.
the humanity from Australia to Canada
Hmm.
understood that Israel is a genocidal criminal regime. I mean,
Mhm.
if you read the publications of IPAC and their think tank institutions, they all yell and scream and cry because they say, "Oh, there is a massive increase of anti-Semitism." The
Exactly.
Zionists, they used Facebook censorship, Twitter censorship, YouTube censorship, closing TV channels, closing people's profiles in order to silence the people. But
Hmm.
this is a sign of death because this is what Soviet Union was doing in 1980s. I mean, in 1980s, when the Soviet regime and ideology had collapsed and people wanted a regime change, so what the Soviets were doing, they were using mass censorship. They were
Yes.
jailing people for speaking their mind. Now, today, we see the same situation with the Judeo-American empire. They are using mass censorship, they are using violence, they are using state terrorism, they are firing people from their jobs for standing up to the Palestinian issue. But these are the signs of the collapse of this empire. How will the Zionist American empire survive? It will survive through force. But when we talk about moral victory, the recent war in Gaza was won by the Palestinians. I mean, if you are a Palestinian today, you visit any country in the world, people will come and will hug you. If you are a Lebanese, if you are a member of Hezbollah, if you are a member of Hassan Nasrallah, if you are an Iranian, everywhere you go in the world, people from all over the planet will come and they will be very happy to meet you because even Iran with this war, it managed to clear and clarify its message to the international community. Because as we mentioned before, for the past 5 or 6 decades, the propaganda of the Zionists was that Iran is a terrorist regime, the mullahs are butchers, are killers, they beat the women, and so many lies. But what this war in Gaza showed, it convinced the rest of humanity that Iran is standing for justice, the Palestinians are victims, and the Zionists are criminals. And they are not oppressing only the Palestinians, but they are oppressing every human being in this planet. There is not a single person who hasn't been censored by the Twitter, by the Facebook, by YouTube for speaking his own mind. So Israel has lost the its image. Humanity hates Israel. They know that Israel is not the state that it claims to be. It is not a democracy, but is an evil fascist regime. And I think in the long term, the Palestinians, Muslims, Iranians, Lebanese, Arabs, humanity, the leftists, everybody is going to win. The Zionists, they're going to lose.
Thank you so very much. We really appreciate you taking your time and sharing some very insightful comments and discussion. We've really enjoyed those discussions. Hopefully, we have you next time to talk more about some of these issues. That is OC Yazegi joining us from Kuala Lumpur, is an historian and social activist. We're going to cross over back to our studio here with our colleague.
Thank you very much, brother.
Okay, welcome.